Good morning, everybody. Good morning, good morning. We all set, everybody here? Everybody's smiling? All your signs are up? Good, okay. Guys frightened everybody away. Nobody's willing to sit on my right this morning because of you guys. Good morning, all. We have a very, very busy schedule this morning. As most of you know, this morning's board meeting will include a presentation by Lee Sander on the MTA's preliminary four-year financial plan for the years 2009 through 2012. This is simply a presentation of a preliminary plan. Let me say it again. This is simply a presentation of a preliminary plan. The plan will be updated and presented again in November, and it will be voted on in December. Let me emphasize again, there will be no vote or any other action taken this morning. This is for information. There is no vote being taken. This morning, Lee will simply introduce the public to the state of the MTA's finances at mid-year and to our proposed methods for dealing with the funding changes we face. Proposed methods for dealing with the funding challenges we face. The purpose of the presenting this now, even though as a board, we won't vote on the plan until December, is to allow a 5-month public discussion on our proposals. This was part of a plan over the last year to make the MTA more transparent to the public. This is, to borrow a football analogy, a 2-minute warning. I don't think so. I think this is a 5-month warning. There is time to address the situation in a number of ways in conjunction with our funding partners. Keep in mind that by law and regulation, the MTA is required to have a balanced budget. Under the regulations of the state controller, the MTA financial plan must be, and I quote, based on reasonable assumptions and methods of estimation, including estimates of projected operating revenues and other operating fund sources. That's a law. We must follow it. That is what Lee will be presenting today. My fellow board members and I look forward to a robust and thoughtful discussion of the challenges facing the MTA and the region in the coming months. We are grateful that the public discussion will coincide with the deliberations of the Ravitch Commission, which Governor Patterson created to look into these critically important issues. And now let's move on to some housekeeping matters. We kicked off the new risk assessment process at the CPOC meeting this month, starting with a discussion of Sonnet. Over time, we'll be discussing the results of these risk assessments and other transit technology projects, and some of the contracts of mega projects and proposed new large complex projects that have not yet begun construction. If there is any board member who has not been able to attend this month's CPOC meeting and would like to have a briefing on any of this, please contact Linda Kleinenbaum. She'd be happy to arrange with your schedule and hers something convenient. We think this is very important. This is a new program, a new way of looking at things, and we'd like everybody on the board to be familiar with it. And we invite anybody else I guess it's September, for the next CPOC meeting to come and listen to it. Finally, this will be Robin Bergstrom's last board meeting. As acting corporate secretary, she will become the deputy general counsel of the MTA Bus Company beginning August 4th, and she has been absolutely instrumental behind the scenes in ensuring that these board meetings run smoothly. I think I speak for the entire board in thanking you, Robin, for the great work and tireless work you've done. You've really done a great job. Thank you, Robin, very much. I know I'll certainly miss you, so you'll have to come back and visit. Okay, and now, are there any public speakers, please?
Oh, yes, we do. Our first public speaker is Mr. X, who will speak on construction, followed by George Hykalis, the Institute for Rational Urban Mobility, and he'll speak on the budget. Mr. X.
I just checked AM News yesterday and learned You may have another fare increase within 1 year from now. This isn't the time or the place. This isn't the time for another fare increase. You just had a fare increase earlier this year, and I don't understand how you can vote on a fare increase when the board members are getting free rides and have been for years, which is an absolute disgrace. And speaking of board members, and when I say board, I don't mean B-O-A-R-D. I mean B-O-R-E-D. I didn't appreciate that board member, the board member who criticized me at the last board meeting. That was unnecessary. Apparently, he didn't listen to my comments about Peter Canito. If he misunderstood my comments or if he misinterpreted them, he should have spoken to me. He shouldn't have put me in the spotlight. I don't have to know who it was, but there's no excuse for that. But you board members fail to realize that this isn't a gravy train. You know, you've been getting, for years, you've been getting free rides, free easy passes, free Metro cards. You don't work for the MTA. Therefore, you're not supposed to get a salary or compensation, but you're still getting it. This isn't a gravy train. And you need to think about that. Okay? You're stealing money from us. You don't need to criticize me about what I said about Peter Canito, or I should say Eugene Levy, courtesy of SCTV, when you've been getting free rides for God knows how long. As Martin Lawrence once said, you need to go check yourself, partner. You need to go check yourself before you criticize me. Okay? And also, 3 weeks from today is August 13th. I want to see how many board members will be here on August 13th. Because I seen a member on D-Day 2007, 3 out of 23 board members were here. 3 weeks later, which is June 27th, all of them were absent. You attend board meetings, but you don't attend public hearings. I've attended both. I'd like to see how many board members will be here on August 13th. And you know what I'm referring to. That's another reason why you shouldn't criticize. You don't attend public hearings. You're getting free rides, and you got the balls to criticize me because I dissed Peter Canito after he dissed me. You got a lot of nerve. You really need to check yourself before you criticize me.
Mr. X, please conclude your remarks. Thank you, Mr. X. Next speaker, George Hykalis, Institute for Rational Urban Mobility, followed by Gene Rushinoff of the Strap Hangers Campaign. Mr. Hykalis.
Good morning. IRM is a New York City-based nonprofit research organization concerned with reducing traffic congestion and improving the livability of dense urban areas. IRM calls on MTA to be more transparent and accountable as it considers 2009 budget issues. The current Finance Committee report was not made available to the public prior to today's public board meeting. This is a severely flawed process and damages the credibility of the MTA, making it more difficult for advocates of sustainable transport to call for increased city and state support for the MTA. The board should not adopt a package of fare and toll hikes in its plans for the 2009 budget until and unless a range of pricing options are analyzed in considerable detail. For example, higher increases in tolls could be combined with lesser increases in fares or even no fare increase at all. The environmental and economic consequences of different packages of fare and toll strategies should be estimated using the best practices model developed at substantial public expense by the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council. MTA is a member of this council and could request that such an analysis be undertaken with full public participation over the next several months. Then an informed decision on the final 2009 budget can be made. Likewise, the analysis and actions of the Ravitch Commission must be considered by the MTA as it exercises its fiscal responsibilities. Action on the current capital budget amendment before the MTA today should be postponed until the Ravitch Commission completes its work. Delaying basic repairs to the transit system while moving ahead on partially funded mega projects seems unwise at this time. Finally, the MTA must move ahead with service improvements that are essential to maintaining the economic well-being of the Manhattan Central Business District. Reducing the utility of the transit system is not a sound approach to stimulating the region's economy. The MTA must remain transparent and forthcoming and not slip back into its opaque and secretive practices of the recent past. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hikalis. Next speaker, Gene Rushinoff. And he'll be followed by Veronica Vanderpool from the Tri-State Campaign.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, MTA board members, and staff. Today, the MTA will officially announce a whopping deficit for 2009, largely caused by declining tax revenues in a very poor economy, rising fuel costs, and the impact of the huge amount of money that you've borrowed over the last decade. And as a result, the MTA is considering, seriously considering a fare hike for next year. It would be the second back-to-back fare hike in the history of the system. At the same time, you're slashing your own capital program by about 18%. These dire events are unfolding against the backdrop of you're doing box office business. The riders are coming in droves. Ridership is up 5% on both the subways and the commuter rail lines. So your 9 million customers are really looking to you to stand up for them in the coming weeks. And they're also looking desperately for the leadership of Governor Patterson and Mayor Bloomberg. And that's why there are protesters here with the signs that urge that the governor and the state come to the aid of the riding public. Governor Patterson has appointed a panel. Hopefully it will make good recommendations about where you can find the money to provide the service that you should be providing. The trick will be to get the legislature to adopt those recommendations. In addition, Mayor Bloomberg's administration has continued the city's practice of underfunding the transit system. By our calculations, they provide about 4 to 7% of the operating budget for New York City Transit for running the subways and the buses, and that's just way too little for a system that moves the city's economy and gives it its life. It's so little, it's like turnstile jumping. And finally, led by the nation's labor unions, there's an effort to get Senators Schumer and Clinton to be in the leadership on getting new federal money from Washington for transit. So will the already beleaguered riders be left holding the bag with higher fares and a poor capital program, or will Mayor Bloomberg and Governor Patterson come to their rescue? We're going to find out in the months to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rushinoff. Next speaker, Veronica Vanderpool, Tri-State Campaign, to be followed by Murray Bowden.
Good morning. My name is Veronica Vanderpool. I'm with Tri-State Transportation Campaign. Today I'm here to talk about the potential budget scenario that is being proposed that is full of bad news, fare increases, declining revenues, and an uncertain future. Transit advocates such as Tri-State Transportation Campaign have worked diligently to inform the public and our elected officials about the MTA's calamitous financial predicament, years of underfunding, ballooning interest payments for money borrowed, and more recently, rising costs of raw materials such as steel, declining operating revenue from a struggling economy, and high gas prices. These circumstances are compounded by the growth in subway and bus ridership at levels we haven't seen since the 1950s, putting additional strain on capital and operating expenses. But New York City transit riders are not the only ones who stand to suffer. Along with potential fare hikes, this budget plans to slash funding for Long Island Bus, an entity that is treated more like an unwanted stepchild than part of the MTA family. Ridership on Long Island Bus is up 4.8% from the first half of last year, yet the MTA and Nassau County refuse to find a sustainable funding solution for Long Island Bus. This is unacceptable and must change. Long Island Bus is vital to Nassau's economy and environment, and especially vital to the 8% of Nassau County households that do not have access to a car. Our commuter rail lines are also facing an uncertain future, with projects like the LIRR third track postponed, because of lack of MTA funding. All of this suggests that relief is nowhere in sight, but the positive news is that there is time. The MTA says a fare hike will not go into effect until next year. In the interim, Richard Ravich's commission will recommend ways to fund our transit network. At that point, the Commission's recommendations will either falter or flourish as Governor Patterson, Mayor Bloomberg, and our state legislature examine how to fund a solution to our transit woes. New, sustained sources of funding will provide relief that requires strong leadership. We expect our elected leaders in each level of government and MTA CEO, Elliott Sander, to rise to this challenge. Thank you.
Thank you. Murray Bowden is our next speaker. And he'll be followed by Andy Darrell.
Good morning. My name is Murray Bowden, and I represent concerned grandparents. The most important thing first, this is my grandson. We were fishing in Provincetown. He caught this striped bass. It was 30 inches long. I can't tell you how much it weighs. Got to be 24 to keep it. We had it for supper. The T-shirt, because I had this made up, but I'll get to that in a minute. This is about bridges and tunnels. They're going to be moving to removing the toll booths, and Florida has this called Sun Pass, which has no battery in it. They sell it for $4.99. You get the $4.99 credit back. Congestion pricing made it possible to prove that we can do toll collection by camera. And so as you remove the toll booths and remove the pollution caused by them, we'll go forward. Could you keep that for bridges and tunnels? In honor of the dotted lines that they put on the Henry Hudson Bridge the last month, which are excellent. The New York State Thruway did the same ones on the Cross Westchester Expressway exit 5 going eastbound. Last year I used to count 4 cars every minute early in the morning cutting across the Gore area. It cut it out completely. I was there yesterday to check it out. So I had this T-shirt made up for Bridges and Tunnels. It says the MTA Bridges and Tunnels 2008 Award. One more thing in here, the yellow line. When you remove those wide channelizing lines and you put just the yellow line in, you'll save a lot of money because the truck only has to go once instead of 3 times. Nobody notices the line. In Westchester County, every single one is incorrectly installed. In New York City, every one of those white lines is incorrectly installed. If 100% of something is wrong, stop using it and save money. So would you give this to presentation for bridges and tunnels? I don't want to say anything about the air conditioning this morning and how some people get into these places earlier and don't have to stand out in the heat. Have a nice weekend and a nice summer.
Thank you, Mr. Bowden. Next speaker is Andy Darrell, Environmental Defense Fund.
Good morning. From the point of view of the environment, this round of decisions about the MTA capital budget are of particular importance because transit ridership is at an all-time high. The demand in the public for transit is higher than it's been in decades. And that's not just a challenge here in New York, that's a national challenge. I have a map that I'll be happy to pass around to you that shows how around the country transit ridership is higher than it ever has been. We have 400,000 new trips per day on the New York City subway systems. In Miami, transit ridership is up 40%, in Denver 8%, in Southern California 12%. The challenge for us then is how do we embrace that demand? And I have two requests really of you. One is to, in your capital priorities as you're going forward, to build in solutions like bus rapid transit that can deliver solutions into communities in New York that don't have good transit access now. These are often less expensive than some of the major capital projects, and there's an opportunity to bring in bus rapid transit, van pool services, quick solutions for communities in eastern Queens, Nassau County, the Bronx, Brooklyn, that don't have good access right now. You've done a great thing with the select bus service up in the Bronx. Let's do more of that. The second point is one I'm sure you'll be hearing a lot of today, which is to please make the fare hike the option of last resort. I know you're working hard in this budget to do that, but at a time when transit ridership goes up, the economic signal of a higher fare is exactly the wrong signal to be sending to the public. There is a bill that is moving through Congress. Gene Rushinoff mentioned it. It passed the House. It is now has not yet been introduced in the Senate that would provide $1.7 billion in emergency economic stimulus transit funding to transit systems around the country, about $230 million for New York City. I would ask all of you to reach out to our senators here in New York, ask them to take leadership on that bill so we can get finances into this operating funds into our system right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Darrow. Bill Henderson, Permanent Citizens Advisory Committee.
Good morning. I'm Bill Henderson. I'm the Executive Director of the PCAC. We recognize the MTA's financial position is dire. Deteriorating real estate market, increasing fuel costs, and reduced state aid have shifted the MTA's position from precariously balanced to a state of crisis. Solutions to the MTA's plight will require cooperation of all those who are partners in operating and funding the MTA, and we understand that this includes the riders. We want to emphasize, however, that the riders have long been paying a greater share of the cost of providing service than in any major transit system nationally, and that they cannot be expected to assume a greater proportion of the system's costs. What the system needs, as we have been saying for a number of years, is a dedicated, reliable, and inflation-sensitive package of public financing. Secondly, even as the MTA's financial position is deteriorating, ridership growth that has not been seen for over half a century is occurring. This is a watershed moment for our region, in which people of the region are turning to transit as first option for mobility. In this kind of environment, it's critical to maintain adequate levels of service throughout the system for both existing and new riders. Thirdly, the MTA system operates successfully only as a true partnership, and partners share both benefits and burdens. The dependence of the state, region, and city on the MTA system is obvious. While the simple solution may be to close holes in the budget by raising fares, the riders have a right to better treatment than this. In closing the shortfall in the MTA budget, we expect nothing less than meaningful contributions from each partner who benefits from the MTA and its services. And we hope that the Ravage Commission will keep this in mind. We hope that you'll keep this in mind as you deliberate on the budget, and we hope that we can have a productive, open, and frank discussion about funding sources and funding options for the health of the system and the health of the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Henderson. Joan Walton, Long Island Acorn.
My name is Joan Walton. I live in South Hempstead in Nassau County, and I'm testifying on behalf of Long Island Acorn. I am here today because we need better service on Long Island Bus, not the drastic cuts that you are proposing in this budget plan. The current service is not adequate to meet the needs of Nassau residents as it is. We need more service on Sundays, Saturdays, and Sundays so people can get to the weekend work shifts on some lines. We need runs that start earlier in the morning or later at night on other lines and more frequent service on other lines. One of our members in Uniondale waited 1 hour and a half on a Saturday to find out that the bus doesn't run on Saturday. Another Acorn member had to sleep overnight in a mall in Hicksville on Sunday night because her shift at Stop and Shop ended after the last bus. She had to wait from 10 p.m. on Sunday night until the bus left the next morning at 6 a.m. I am 77, and I know pretty soon I'll have to give up my car, and I just dread the idea that I have to rely on the bus service on Long Island. If I lived in the city, I would have given up my car a long time ago. Ridership on Long Island buses keeps growing, and especially with rising gas prices, is likely to keep growing. But the MTA and Nassau County refuse to find a sustainable funding solution for Long Island bus. This has to change. Acorn members and other low and moderate income people in Nassau County need Long Island bus to get to work and to get to school and to get to the grocery store. This slash is like a hit on the lowest of us. It's a hit on poor people, and it's unconscionable.
Thank you very much. That concludes the list of speakers for the public speaking session today.
Okay, we need approval of the minutes. The minutes of last month's meeting have been distributed to all members. Are there any corrections or omissions? Motion made. Second? All in favor? Approved. Okay, next we go to the Executive Director and CEO presentation of the joint session of the Board and the Finance Committee. Lee, you're on.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also understand that Mr. Toussaint is en route. He had signed up to speak, and we have one presentation before we get to the presentation on the preliminary budget, and if Roger gets here by then, we'll do that. If not, we will then go into the preliminary budget. But before we get to the financial plan presentation, we need to take a few moments out today to honor 7 truly heroic MTA employees who should serve as role models for all of us in this room. Should we find ourselves in the situation they encountered, a Long Island Railroad train crew and 2 MTA police officers stopped a sexual assault in progress at the Long Island Railroad Freeport Station on July 1. Because of their actions, a quick arrest was made and the victim rescued for greater injury was inflicted. Today we recognize from the Long Island Railroad Assistant Conductor Eugene Chino. Where's Eugene? Is he here? Great, okay. Collector Lorraine Martinez. Where's Ms. Martinez? Is she here? There we are, okay. Collector Dana Rizzuto. I think Helena is going to round up some of those folks, okay. Ms. Rizzuto. Conductor James Gannon. Okay. Train engineer Brian Zadariki. And from the MTA Police, officers Kevin Smith and Michelle Russo. Are they there? Great. Moments after their Manhattan-bound train arrived at Freeport, a customer informed Long Island Railroad crew of screams coming from the east end of the platform. As Mr. Chino rushed to investigate, he and his colleagues, Ms. Martinez, Ms. Rizzuto, Mr. Gorman, and Mr. Zadariki, used newly issued Long Island Railroad cell phones to communicate with each other and to notify the railroad's operations center at Jamaica to halt traffic down the line. Mr. Chino climbed down onto the track bed where he saw a man assaulting a 28-year-old woman just a few feet of an electrified third rail carrying 700 volts of direct current. He confronted the assailant, shouting at him to stop, just as MTA police officer Smith and Russo arrived at the scene to make the arrest. All did their best to comfort the victim until medical assistance arrived. This show of professionalism, of selflessness and bravery, brings honor to all the employees of the MTA. This is exactly the kind of teamwork we need every day from our customers, train crews, and police. Here, a customer saw something and said something, and this crew and officers did something truly heroic. We are especially pleased the Long Island Railroad crew, equipped with cell phones issued for emergencies like this, part of our customer service initiatives, was armed for action. All 7 of you, as you have, you're all here, and please join, as we are, Chairman Hemmerdinger and myself for our presentation. So if we could have the plaques. And the plaques we have here. And so where's Patrick, photographer? Do some quick photos. Okay, well, we will do the photos then after. Mr. Chino. Thank you. Ms. Martinez.
Is Patrick around?
Ms. Rizzuto.
Didn't lose him.
Dan.
You all should look happy.
Yeah.
Smile.
That's okay. She'll take care of it.
Okay, as long as you like that, okay.
Great work.
Everybody smile.
Yeah, great.
There you go. Smile. You got it? Everybody okay?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you
guys
very
did
much.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Wonderful.
everybody. Really good work.
Terrific. Okay, has Mr. Toussaint, Ed, is Roger here? You have a color copy? Okay. Okay, if not, we will now proceed to the presentation. Mike, we want to clear the...
You want him here? Over here, Mike? Okay.
What was that? Okay, okay, let me just... okay.
Yep.
Andrew, thank you. Let me know when you're ready, Michael. Yeah, I think, I'm not, I think, yeah, for better, for worse. Okay. Okay, so I now would like to present the MTA's 2009 preliminary budget. Today's submission of the financial plan and the preliminary 2009 budget is informational, kicking off the process which will end when the board adopts a 2009 budget in December. I want to emphasize there is no vote being taken today on the budget, and there is no vote being taken to move forward with public hearings to increase fares or tolls. The purpose of this presentation is to walk you through the numbers and share our best thinking regarding measures needed to close the MTA's financial plan gap. I recognize that what we are proposing is difficult, but our challenges, as you will see, are sobering. We will have the next 5 months to continue to discuss these numbers, the proposal, and any and all alternative proposals. As we go through the next 5 months, it is important to keep in mind what is required of us with respect to the budget and financial plan. We are required to have a balanced budget. More specifically, the state controller regulations mandate that we submit a balanced plan, quote, based on reasonable assumptions and methods of estimation, including estimates of projected operating revenues and operating funding sources, including but not limited to fares, tolls, taxes, and governmental subsidies. Next, the February financial plan. Turning our attention from the process to the numbers, as you may recall, this was the MTA's financial outlook last February. As you can see, after the gap closing measures we adopted last year, we projected closing 2008 with a surplus of $368 million. That surplus was then rolled forward to reduce the size of the 2009 budget deficit to $216 million. The gap was then expected to grow to $416 million by 2011, still a relatively manageable number given how far out in the plan period it is. Update on major risks. The left side of this slide lists the risks that we identified last July that could have altered or invalidated the revenue and spending projections given at that time. The biggest threat was the effect of a drop in the real estate tax receipts. At that time, we assumed the methodology of the city's forecast for these taxes which projected these receipts dropping about 20% in 2008 and then staying fairly level over the financial plan period. Other risks outside of our control included the slowing of the economy and rising energy costs. In addition, we said that we would have to maintain discipline relative to our own spending. The right side of the slide in red, and let me get started with this, make sure we can do that. Good. Over here. The red part of the slide shows a summary of what has transpired. The real estate market and the economy proved much more problematic, and energy costs, as we all know too well, have soared. On the plus side, the spending increases of our budget have remained within the budget envelope. Next, significant changes from the February plan. As you know, a lot has changed since February, and the news has not been good. What you see on this slide are the three primary drivers that are adversely impacting our financial picture. And again, we have the drivers here. All three of these problems were risks we identified when we closed the budget last year, and we have been tracking and reporting on them monthly at the Finance Committee meetings. Over the 2-year period alone, between 2008 and 2009, these three items are now projected to negatively affect the budget to the tune of over $700 million. Next, energy expense growth. Looking closer at energy, the last slide showed that in February, we underestimated what we will need to spend to meet our energy requirements. This slide shows how much we expect to spend on the two key components of our use: traction and propulsion power and fuel for buses and trains. As you can see, next year we expect to spend $678 million. Between 2007 and 2009, we expect the cost for power and fuel combined to have jumped a whopping 39%. Next, real estate transaction taxes. This is a slide that we have shown many times. It shows the volatility in our real estate tax revenues, which we have become highly dependent on. We have talked many times about the tremendous growth in these revenues over the past several years, creating windfalls that artificially mask the underlying problems we have in our operating budget. Unfortunately, those days are over, at least for the immediate future. As you can see, 2009 receipts are projected to be below the level they were 5 years before. The drop between 2007 and 2009 is 40%. Real estate transaction tax receipts. This slide just serves as a reminder of what we said about the risk in real estate taxes last July. The slide is actually part of a deck that was presented in April 2007 to the Finance Committee. We cautioned that if the 2008 receipts were identical to 2004 receipts, then over $1.1 billion would drop out of the plan through 2001. $309 million alone would drop out of 2008. This is essentially what happened. Next, changes from the February financial plan. This slide summarizes all the changes between February and July. What you see in the black on top are the numbers you saw 6 slides back in the bar chart. This was the forecast from February. And again, you see the surplus that we anticipated and then the manageable deficits that we had anticipated in 2009 through 2011. What you see in the top blue line is a restatement of the same numbers that are in black, stripped of the value of the carryover and the policy and gap closing actions we took last year. This gets us back to our baseline budget before any adjustments. So now you can see the deficit that we now anticipate without actions in 08, and then going forward these large deficits. The red block summarizes all the spending and revenue changes that we are now forecasting as compared to where we were in February. Again, fuel and energy increases, real estate revenue reductions, state tax changes, so forth. And again, totaled over here. Again, some negatives and then positives. You can see the tremendous effect of the tax revenue changes and fuel costs shown on the previous pages. Absent any gap closing measures, the deficit for 2009 will approach $1 billion. What this all boils down to is the line in green, which shows how much in annual gap closing actions must be achieved to bring our budget back into balance. And here we have the gap closing actions, again, against the anticipated deficit. Here, as we can see, 712 in 09, and then 813, so forth. What this all boils down to, okay, so we have that. Okay, next. The July financial plan. Now that I've identified the need, the next set of slides focus on a series of gap closing measures that we are asking you to consider over the next several months. We have strived to propose an equitable sharing of the burden by all our key stakeholders that use and benefit from our system, starting with ourselves, our agencies and employees, and including our governmental partners and our customers. These proposals are summarized in 3 different categories: internal actions, external actions, and fair and toll yield changes. The internal actions focus on belt-tightening and other forms of self-help. The external actions are requests for assistance from our governmental funding partners. And fair and toll yield changes are what we propose that we ask from our customers. Let's focus now on the internal actions. We recognize that before we ask our governmental partners for assistance or ask our riders and motorists to pay more, we must first tighten our belts and implement any and all actions that we can take to reduce the deficit. What you see on this slide are all self-help measures that are designed to be implemented by the MTA. They include a wide range of actions, some of which are already underway. Some are one-time savings opportunities, and others are recurring. Some of these actions are ones with which you are already familiar with, and some are new. None of them compromise safety or lessen system maintenance. They also do not include service reductions. I have heard many times from members of the board and from other transit advocates that service cuts are not the answer, and they are not being proposed today. Internal actions already taken. While service reductions are not proposed to close our gap, unfortunately, neither are the enhancements that I proposed a year ago. The savings from the elimination of this program are reflected in the base budget numbers, given that they were part of the 2008 adopted budget. The second bullet on this slide reflects a comprehensive series of administrative reductions in hiring, travel and food, and telecommunications that were implemented earlier this month. We're here. Between 2008 and 2009, the administrative actions coupled with the cancellation of the Service Enhancement Program will save a total of $135 million. In addition, while we are tightening our belt, we are also looking at ways to maximize our non-fare box revenues. Nearly $200 million in real estate-related revenues are reflected in the 2008 baseline budget. We are expecting to increase this number by nearly $20 million next year, largely due to advertising, including new media like tunnel ads, and also some of you have seen the subway wraps that we have done. I'm also looking to push the envelope even further in developing more revenue-generating business opportunities. We are working closely with our sponsorship agent to bring identified opportunities for the system, and we will soon be piloting a CNN news and information network. We will also look to maximize business opportunities as we progress capital projects, such as information technology in new cars, advertising opportunities in stations and public-private development opportunities, in conjunction with various underutilized agency assets. Continuing with internal actions to be taken. In addition to what we have already put into play, we are proposing to implement a number of internal measures that fall into two categories: those that will produce annual recurring savings and other one-time opportunities that can contribute to gap closing. The MTA agencies will be expected to cut costs by 6% over the planned period, continuing the 1.5% annual reduction begun last year, and that's cumulative in terms of 6%. We have also assumed that our employees will make a modest contribution to the plan through negotiation of new contracts. This is the same assumption we made last year. In addition, we propose to implement efficiency measures, notably the Business Service Center, which will consolidate back office operations for all of our agencies. This consolidation, which requires an investment in the near term, is expected to reap annual savings beginning in the last year of the 4-year plan period. We are also proposing to continue our efforts in the area of institutional transformation by looking further at opportunities and efficiencies that can be made by our agencies. Finally, we are recommending two actions that recognize that we can no longer afford to subsidize others. First, we are proposing to reduce the MTA's subsidy of Long Island Bus, returning to our historical allocation. And secondly, we are proposing to charge official city, state, and county vehicles for bridge and tunnel crossings that currently travel at no cost. In total, $171 million will be saved between 2008 and 2009 from these recurring actions. In addition to the recurring savings that we have identified, there are one-time opportunities that we can take advantage of to reduce the gap before turning to other stakeholders. These opportunities include taking a $135 million interagency loan in each of the next 2 years from the fund that we established to pre-fund future retiree health benefits. We propose to responsibly pay this loan back in 2011 and 2012. We are also proposing to reclaim and transfer back to the operating budget $120 million in funds that had previously been allocated from the 2006 surplus but have not yet been committed. Next, year-to-year changes in expenses. Before I move on to talk about the external actions needed to close the gap, I want to take a minute to show you what the spending picture looks like after we have taken the internal actions. The blue bar represents total expense growth. The green is what we call uncontrollable expenses, which include things like health and welfare costs, pension and fuel costs that are beyond our direct ability to influence. Again, you can see the green. And the red bar, right, debt service. And the red bar represents the controllable part of our budget where we can directly make a difference. This is payroll and overtime, especially headquarters and the agency operating budgets. The takeaways from this slide are our total expenses over the course of the financial plan are expected to be near the CPI. Our total expenses would be even lower, but not for the part of the budget beyond our direct control. And the growth in the controllable part of our budget is nearly flat for next year. It is 0.4%. Now, let us turn to external actions. Actions by each of our governmental partners will also be necessary if we are to overcome the projected deficits. Let's start with our federal partners. We propose to seek legislative changes to federal mandates for commuter rail employees, which can save us over $62 million on an annual basis without adversely affecting our employee benefits. With respect to the state and city, a year ago the financial plan relied on $600 million in new contributions beginning in 2010. This plan proposes accelerating about half of that contribution into 2009 through a variety of actions. The list on this slide represents a series of proposed actions that will better the MTA's bottom line. It is not an exhaustive list, it is only illustrative. Other actions taken by our funding partners could substitute for these examples. We have identified areas where our governmental stakeholders can increase participation in programs where they have historically had a role in paying for these costs. We are proposing full state and city reimbursement for school fares and senior citizen discounts, which currently cost the MTA $104 million annually. We are also proposing that the city share fully in the responsibility for the costs of paratransit. MTA assumed responsibility for this service from the city in 1993. Demand for paratransit has grown beyond any expectation at the time responsibility for this service was transferred. Sharing equally in the costs would save MTA $113 million next year and grow thereafter. Finally, the plan proposes restoration of the shortfall in state tax revenues discussed earlier in the presentation, and additionally, like last year's proposal, we are asking the state to eliminate tax loopholes affecting real estate transactions. Taken together, these two measures will add $109 million between 2008 and 2009. Fare and toll yield changes. Just as the plan proposes to accelerate the timing of new governmental aid, it also proposes to accelerate the next fare and toll increase by 6 months from January 2010 to July 2009. In addition to earlier implementation, we are proposing an increase in the yield from fare and toll adjustments from 5% to 8% in order to make up for the revenue that was lost when the last increase was reduced from 6.5% to 3.85%. Thereafter, beginning in 2011, we propose to get back on track to implement regular, every other year fare and toll increases that are indexed to inflation. While this action is clearly difficult, if we were to forego any fare and toll adjustment, the alternative would necessitate deep and damaging service reductions or even higher than proposed contributions from our funding partners. The July financial plan. This slide shows the July forecast for the full 4 years of the financial plan. Assuming the necessary gap closing measures are put in place and after accounting for prior year cash carryovers. In summary, we would expect to have a surplus this year that would be rolled forward to balance next year. As you can see, deficits would remain in the out years of the plan period. In looking at these figures, it is important to remember that we are still 5 months away from the adoption of the budget, which is a relatively long time, and that revenues and economic outlook may very well change, as in fact they have in this preceding period. If external actions fail and no revenue streams are identified, this slide attempts to answer the question of what might happen if the $381 million in external funding does not become a reality. Unfortunately, the MTA only has two means of balancing its budget on its own. They are fare and toll adjustments and/or service reductions. You can see that each 1% in the yield on fares and tolls beginning next July would generate only $25 million in 2009, which grows to an annual amount of $51 million. And each 1% reduction in service would save only $30 million in 2009, growing to $60 million annually. And this is the last slide. And this is what happens over the next several months. August to November, public discourse on preliminary budget. Late November, final proposed budget presented to you, the MTA Board. Early December, the Ravitch Commission issues its report. And then late December, the MTA Board adopts budget and schedules public hearings for changes in fares and tolls and for service reductions if necessary. With that, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my formal presentation. Mike, if we could...
Thank you, Lee. While we get reorganized here, does anybody on the board want to make some comments, discussion? Anybody? Thank you. Go ahead.
I just want to say that I'm speaking for myself and not in my position as chairman of the Finance Committee. I think, for me, when I look at this budget, I don't think, considering the position that the MTA finds itself in now, that we have nearly made the cuts that need to be made in expenses internally in the operation. Before we ask the riding public to take an 8% fare hit, which is a substantial amount for hardworking people, I think we need to redouble efforts here at the agency to find every nickel, every quarter we can in fare reduction, in expense reductions. On top of that, I don't know how many people are aware here, but we've had legislation pending in Albany for 3 or 4 years now that's been stalled, that's gone nowhere, to reorganize the MTA. This is something that I've been talking about the Finance Committee at the board meetings. I think this needs to be reinvigorated. I would hope the Ravitch Committee looks at this, because the MTA is not set up now to run as efficiently as it can. No matter what the management does, we cannot do what we should be doing for the riding public, operating this diverse organization that was put together by taking on different systems such as the city buses and the 2 commuter railroads. We need to consolidate our operation, and no matter how we try to do it here, we need legislation to do it properly. I think if that was done and we consolidated and ran this place for the 21st century, the savings here would be immense. And I think the situation is getting to the point now where the people up in Albany, the politicians, have to really look at what they've foisted on this agency. And we've been talking about it and talking about it. I've been here since 1994, and unfortunately, I don't really think we've done the right thing. And it's not because the board hasn't tried, it's because of these external factors that need to be changed. And if Albany really wants to look at it, the city wants to look at it, there needs to be fundamental changes made in the way this place operates. And until you do that, you're going to have fare increase on top of fare increase. And as far as the capital budget goes, which hasn't even been addressed today, I think that's something that's going to have to really be revisited. And one of the speakers today made a comment about the capital plan versus the mega projects versus the state of good repair plan that we need here. I think this total capital plan has to be looked at. It's going to have to be watched by the staff and by the board, and I think revisited, because I think the spending priorities in the capital plan are wrong, and that also needs to be changed. So I really think Albany and our leaders up in with the governor and the mayor need to look at the way this place is run, and we need legislative help to change the way we operate. And that's the only way you're going to be able to deliver the services and the deal that the riding public demands and deserves.
Yes, sir, Ed.
So, Commissioner Saul, as Chair of the Finance Committee, could you tell us how much that reorganization could save? I mean, as you said, it's been 4 or 5 years that this legislation has been there. Could you tell us how much it could save in its various components?
I don't have the numbers. I'm not capable of doing it here. But all one has to imagine is if we have all these diverse operations running with administrative overhead, all the support that's necessary to run them. Me personally, I envision a rail operation, a bus operation, and a bridge and tunnels operation. And just think about how much can be saved here. Look at this building and look how many people work to support all these organizations. I'm not capable now to deliver the numbers. I don't have them in front of me. But as a business person, I think it's logical to assume that the savings would be immense.
Anybody else want any other comments? Yes, sir.
Commissioner, I agree with you. I think that this is becoming a little bit out of control here, where I just can't sit here and every time a presentation comes up, we either say yay or nay. We got to get down to the hard numbers real soon about where this money is really going. We continue to have a blank check and sign this check to do business for the strap hangers, which is our responsibility. But to go back to the strap hangers once again and ask them to pay more for what appears in my perception to be less is unacceptable. So we really have to tighten our belts and look for other ways to save money. Now, security is very, very important. If we concentrate on security and concentrate on getting the people to and from where they're supposed to be, we could probably do more with a little bit less. But it seems like we've got 50 projects going, and now everything is hitting a dead wall. Every time you turn around, West Side's not going to be finished, Second Avenue's not going to be finished, this is not going to be finished, that's not going to be finished, and we're running out of money. The federal government is not stepping in to play their part. The state legislators, they come, they have 15 or 20 of them stand there and say, don't raise the fare, don't raise the fare, but nobody's talking about taking money out of their districts or out of their pet projects to help fund the MTA. Now, Mr. Sander walked into a lot of this that's going on. Mr. Hummerdinger, he definitely walked into a lot that's going on. I walked into a lot that's going on, but we really have to stop now and say, you know what? We've got to reorganize this from top to bottom, from bottom to top, to make it happen the right way. And I think as a board member, since I don't work for Mr. Sander or anybody else here, and I'm appointed and I'm a board member, then what we should have in front of us is every single piece of paper that tells us where every single dollar is going and be able to determine whether or not that's necessary and whether or not the board should continue to give the go-ahead on whatever's being spent, because there are a lot of things that are totally unnecessary in the MTA, and to ask people, mom and pop, to come out of their pockets one more time for a fare increase is just unacceptable to me.
Anybody else on the board have something to say? Susan.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sure that many of the board members share many of the opinions that have already been expressed. The point I'd like to make is that the reason we put this out in July now is to give us 5 months to look at those numbers. This is a plan that's proposed. It's not necessarily, nor do I think it will be, the plan that's finally voted on. And I do appreciate the willingness of my fellow board members to spend the time that they've committed in order to get to the bottom of it and to look thoroughly. And I understand that the staff is more than willing to help us with that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Anybody else? Last call. Norman.
Yeah, Dale. Yeah, I had the privilege a couple months ago to start working with the people who are working on an internal committee called the Institutional Transformation Committee, and they brainstormed a whole lot of these changes that conceivably could save the employer, we refer to the employer, the carrier, the MTA, more money between the commuter railroads, and still enhance service. And they were all very interesting things. None of those remotely approached the magnitude of the financial crisis that you have described repeatedly over the last 8 to 10 years. This is not, no one repealed the business cycle, and a substantial portion of our, practically our entire dedicated funding stream comes from cyclically sensitive sources. Now, I'm not an economist, but I understand prices go up, prices go down. Ecclesiastic says to everything there's a season. And we lived off the revenues of the real estate industry for the last 10 years, all fat, dumb, and happy, when the rest of the market was going through the roof. When things were fine, all the politicians were right there to cut taxes, cut subsidies here, and let the other funds flow. Now things are not fine, and the MTA is one of the only counter-cyclical economies that exist in New York. So you can see that's one reason people are flocking here, is people are hurting. People can't afford to put gas in their cars, so they ride the train, so now they can get to work. It's a very positive thing. Now, I suggest that they really have to look at things. Yeah, we'll make internal changes, belt tightening. I love belt tightening. You know, as I get fatter, I always want to tighten my belt tightens automatically. But that doesn't remotely approach the problem we have. Now, back when gas was $2 a gallon, had someone had the intestinal fortitude, I think someone used another phrase earlier, to step forward with gas taxes, that petroleum business taxes that were sensitive to price increases, no one would have even noticed it. If it was $1.20, gas was $1.20 a gallon, to have attached the state petroleum business taxes to the actual price of that gas at that point, you wouldn't even be talking about fare increases now. There'd be plenty of money running in here. And but we didn't want to do that. They wanted to cap it at that point, call it a tax savings, and now, yeah, what did we get out of it? $4 a gallon gas and a operating deficit on the MTA. And I just think that, you know, yeah, we're willing to do belt tightening, all these institutional changes. No one here is throwing away money, despite what many people think. But, yeah, we'll tighten our belts. But you've got to have some answers that remotely approach the magnitude of the problem. Thank you very much.
Doreen.
Mr. Chairman, I think, and I hope it's become clear to the public, that fare and toll increases are last resort, that we are all going to work overtime, as Commissioner Seabrook said, to turn over every stone here in a search for better ways to do things that will save us money. Apropos of that, I think there are 3 areas that I'd like to specially focus on. The first one being fuel, how we procure it, and how we guard ourselves against fluctuations. Our debt, where I think there could be improvements made in the cost of the bonds that we're issuing. And third, our real estate assets. Scarlett O'Hara said the last thing you want to do is sell the land, and I tend to agree with that, but I think there are creative ways that we could be partnering with the private sector in an effort to make our real estate assets work for us a lot better. So those are 3 areas of special focus that I'd like to work on. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mark.
I guess that I would just like to echo Norman somewhat, that there are always in an organization of this size opportunities to make improvements on the margin and achieve savings that still enable you to get the job done. But I think that the problems we're facing are of a scope in terms of the loss of our tax support and the basic cost of doing business, fuel being a major part of it, are of a scope that is going to require actions by us and others way beyond simply studying exactly how each nickel and dime is spent. And so I don't think that we should lose the focus and urgency of the need for a broader structural solution for our financing problems. Certainly the Ravitch Commission has been created by the governor with a view to addressing exactly that issue. And I think that that's something that we need to keep very strongly in mind as we go forward. I mean, this is not just a structural problem in terms of how the MTA itself is managed. I mean, that alone I don't think is going to bail us out. I think it is a structural problem in terms of how we are financed overall by the state, the region, the city.
Anybody else?
Yes, I agree with Mark and Norman also. I think this problem is huge, and by nickel and diming and trying to save a couple of bucks by going through each organization is, I might be an act of good faith and come up with some dollars, but I think we've got to find a real funding source, and it has to be done by our legislators in Albany.
Anybody else? Jeff?
You know, obviously the problem is large. I think everyone acknowledges that. But I think it goes without saying that we all need to find ways to solve the problem. And every little dollar does add up. And I think before we go out and ask for fares and ask for money, we also need to make sure that we do find every dollar within this agency and reorganization. So although I agree with our colleagues that this problem is big and we can't cut ourselves out of it, we need to find ways to cut even more and to make sure that we've cut as much as we possibly can to show the public, to show Albany that we have done everything that we can. And I think that's important. I don't want that to be lost. No, we can't cut our way out of it, but it is extremely important that we make as many cuts as we possibly can.
Anybody else? Jim?
Well, we've certainly got a problem on our hands. And, you know, I've been here since 1993. And we've had good years and bad years, mostly bad years. And you look at how we're formed and what part of the economic structure we are in our regional economy. And it's really going to take our funding partners and us in a very, very optimistic way to sit down and really delve into the structure under which we operate. We need long-range solutions. We go through this every 3 or 4 years. We have the same problems, but we never seem to resolve them. This is the time to resolve them because our last-ditch effort is to toll and fare increases. That's our last-ditch effort. But we really have to sit around a table, and it's going to hurt. It's not going to be easy. But I think that we're all up to it, and we just have to bring our funding partners to the table, and hopefully they're as optimistic about how we can solve the problems as we are.
Thank you. Who else? Mitch?
This reminds me, as Jim has clearly indicated, of many times going through the same thing all over again. It reminds me, and I'm sure it reminds Ms. Kupferman, on the table over there, of 1979 when both of us were working in the state legislature, and the first time we went through this type of gut-wrenching activity to try and make sure that the MTA could provide the service at a reasonable cost. And Dick Ravitch helped, obviously, in that context at that time, as did many legislative leaders, including the person I worked for, who understood the importance of the mass transit system to this region. Notwithstanding the economic times we are in today, can you imagine how worse it would be if the system was not operating as good as it is today? The economy of this region would be even significantly less robust or less strong than it is today without this mass transit system. And that's why the system is so important, not only for those people who live and work in the city, but for many of us who live in the suburbs and work in the city or vice versa. It's become an integral part of this region. And without it, all of this system will go down and this region's economy will go down even worse. So we have to make sure that we do everything possible in the next 5 months. The good thing about putting it out in July is that everybody, the public, the elected officials, the state legislature, the governor, the mayor, the county executives, have the opportunity to determine and work with us on finding a series of solutions. Because, as I agree with Jim, we can't keep going back through this every year. The only thing that changes is the paint color on the room. Everything else stays the same, and that's not beneficial to any of us, nor is it beneficial to our riders who go up and down each day depending upon a variety of factors over which they and we have no control, and that's unfortunate. So I agree with my fellow commissioners that we're going to try to do everything we can, from cost savings to other activities, and also calling upon our funding partners. We call on the state and the city all the time, but the federal government has not provided operating assistance to this agency or any other mass transit agency in this country since 1997. We used to get significant amount of money for operating assistance from the federal government, and we don't get any at the moment. And that's wrong. That's the wrong priority in a time in which not just this region, but many regions, as the gentleman clearly indicated in his comments during the public session, that mass transit ridership is up all over the country. It's up for a reason, and people want it even to go further than it can. So I think we all hope that the reasonable assumptions that the executive director have included in this budget are incorrect, and that they're actually better. We would all hope. As one of my former bosses said, going back to the Bible, all the prophets are in the Old Testament. We're trying to estimate what's going to happen tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that. We can only hope that we do it reasonably and collectively, and that everyone in this region comes to a decision that they can stand on, because we cannot continue to rely on the rider for increased fares and tolls. It's getting to the point where we're going to get to a point where that's going to hurt our ridership, and that's the wrong thing to do in this time of economic distress.
Andrew?
Of course, I agree with my fellow commissioners. Let's, by all means, see if we can achieve greater efficiencies. Let's ask for assistance from our funding partners. But let's not compromise safety or the integrity of the system. This system is what drives the whole economic health of this region, and if it were to fall down, it would cost ever more than that to bring it back, as we know from past experience. So by all means, let's look for ways to cut, but let's not compromise safety or the integrity of this system. Thank you.
Just want to add my support to Mitch's comments concerning the growth element of our responsibilities, and that the irony is, of course, that as the money runs out, the demand increases, and as we plan for the future and attempt to find more permanent and reliable funding sources. From a proactive planning perspective, we really do need to include in those plans sources that will enable us to hold riders that we have attracted, but just from the standpoint of improving the quality of life in general in the region, and for our riders. It's extremely important that we maintain this forward-looking approach to our planning process, and not just make it another stopgap effort to, in a sense, make it through the night. That's all I had. Thank you.
Anybody else? Looking around. Okay, then I'm just going to say that I think you all have said it very eloquently. I think it's quite clear that there are no magic bullets. There's no absolute answer. It's going to take a lot of people working very hard to come up with a series of solutions to a major problem. I think we need to remind everybody that the MTA and what it represents is a major economic development agency in lower New York State. Our ability to transport people relatively cheaply, safely, and efficiently makes us competitive to those cities and parts of the country that doesn't have a mass transit system like we do. I think we have to remind our funding partners of that and work on that, because if something happens to us, the whole system goes down. So I thank everybody for their help. I'm sure we'll all be talking to our legislators, all our elected government officials, and trying to work this out over the next 5 months in the best possible way for the riding public. I thank you all for your help. And now I'm going to switch a little bit out of the order, out of respect to our union leader, Roger Toussaint, who got held up in traffic. If you would like to say something to us, sir, we would like you to do that now, please, before we continue our regular meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll take that as a dig.
No dig intended, honestly.
I guess that's why you got to rely on mass transit to get around the city. So anyway, thanks for the accommodation and moving away from the normal format. I appreciate the opportunity. I wanted to say a few things at this critical moment. I think that, I mean, listening to some of the comments here, I thought there was at a kind of revival meeting, some kind of rebirth but I think that clearly there is no dispute that the MTA is in a bind with the situation with fuel and real estate revenues. But this is coming at a time when we obviously have record ridership and demands on the system for increased capacity, and we have chances for growth. I think on a scale that we have not encountered or contemplated since the rebuilding of the system in the 80s and 90s. So we, at a time when there are both possibilities, opportunities surrounded by challenges. And I wanted to reiterate something that we learned, obviously, during the past period, the last rebuilding phase, that the things that we should not turn to include deferred maintenance and allowing the infrastructure to deteriorate, or allowing the re-emergence of eyesores on the system. We need to keep the system on the modernization track. And putting first things first, as has been mentioned by several board members here, we need to avoid the instinct of taking the easy road of raising fares. Federal, state, and city support for mass transit need to be substantially increased. The funding problem is a structural problem, as has again been reiterated before me by other speakers. Whereas in the past, with the soaring real estate economy, we were able to avoid confronting the massive public disinvestment in mass transit. Now we are confronted by it. Now, to the extent that this exercise has gotten everyone's attention to choose which road you want to go down, whether you want to go down the old road of fare increases and just sweeping problems under the rug, or confronting the problems and figuring out a way to not only fix the immediate deficit, but to obtain the funding necessary to position the system and build the system as a first-class world system. I think to the extent that that was the exercise, then maybe we're at a good point here. Without the proper funding, the burden will continue to be unfairly shifted to the riders. And especially for this reason, we in the Transport Workers Union oppose a fare increase. With ridership levels and revenues increasing steadily, we should welcome it and not discourage it or take advantage because of people not having the options or having less and less options but to ride on the subways and buses. On the labor front, I must say that we also end up in a paradox. As transit workers record the greatest productivity in history due to the unprecedented ridership levels, they are being told to sacrifice more. And with more commuters hopping on the trains and buses and the implementation of additional initiatives like bus rapid transit and other system expansions, our productivity continues to increase. So from our point of view, we have not only paid our fare, but I think we have prepaid for the long haul. And while we understand that there are cuts, the proposed cuts come about as a result of a mandate to prioritize where you can cut some fat. We are not convinced that the MTA has gone far enough or deep enough in terms of cutting, doing administrative cuts in duplication and labor relations and so forth. I wanted to particularly mention and reiterate the federal legislation that has passed the House of Representatives, H.R. 6052. Again, this would be the first time that you get operating assistance or relief for the operating budget from the federal government in about a decade or so. This passed the House of Representatives, and it will provide about $237 million of some immediate relief, and we should be grabbing at it as we explore other options. And we would urge this board to find a way to go on record strongly supporting this bill, as well as urging all elected officials and transportation advocates to do likewise. A point has to be made about the funding at the city and state level. People transportation funding was cut in half in 1995 and have not been adjusted for inflation since. And this cannot go on or continue at a moment when the future of mass transportation rests on hinges. So the funding needs to be increased in this area. Additionally, the city's subsidy for providing paratransit services falls short. I believe I heard this mentioned before, but I wanted to reiterate this. The financial support from the city is capped irrespective of increased costs to the authority. And paratransit expenses, of course, is one of the MTA's fastest growing uncontrollable items in terms of cost items. Ridership has increased, I understand, by about 16% in the past year alone, and this funding agreement with the city and the MTA is outdated. So I guess the opportunity presented here, or the challenges presented here, include that it's time to, on the one hand, to send out the bill collectors. And on the other hand, to look at both the dedicated revenue streams and require them to catch up with the demands on the system and establish new revenue sources that are needed to prevent the erosion of the system. Recently, the governor indicated on a positive note that he was interested in looking at alternatives to the fare increase, and we welcome that. We think that the mayor needs to follow suit, and this board itself should take all of this as a cause for pause and look at this moment and not go down the path of fare increases, the easy road, and shifting the burden to riders and to its workers, who you're going to be dependent upon to carry the system through the rebuild that's possible, the opportunities that are possible. So with that said, again, I thank you for the opportunity. I apologize for my late arrival. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now we'll go back to the normal activity of the board. Okay. Committee on Finance. Andrew, you're up to bat.
Mr. Chairman, there is one action item this month. It is the amendment to the MTA 2005-2009 capital plan. The committee approved this item, and I move it.
All those in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed?
I just want to indicate that I am in support of this at the moment, and that all of the funds earmarked for the third track project on the Long Island Railroad have been kept constant at the moment, and we look forward to moving that project forward.
I also want to indicate that I'm supportive of moving this thing forward. There's a lot of questions, a lot of issues in this capital plan amendment that I hope and that we will continue to address in the CPRB process. But I think it's important to move this along so that those projects get funded, that clock starts ticking. I also want to point out that and call upon the MTA to get the next 5-year capital plan to us as soon as possible, not only to address this capital plan amendment, but what went unsaid during the entire financial plan presentation is that does not address the capital needs or the funding that's going to be required to invest in our infrastructure. It's one thing to invest in our daily operating, it's another thing to invest in our infrastructure. And I think we should be dealing with both issues at the same time.
Any other
If I could just echo Commissioner Kay, while I'm generally supportive of this amendment, it is really important to know where in the next capital plan many of the items that are, quote, deferred, unquote, land, because that's vitally important to the continuance. And obviously some of the projects that are deferred could not actually have proceeded anyway and probably shouldn't be called deferred. There should be another term for some of those items, but I echo Commissioner Kay.
Delayed. Not deferred, delayed. Okay, can I have a vote? Anybody opposed? So moved. Andrew.
Mr. Chairman, non-procurements, non-competitive procurements, green. The committee recommended approval of one non-competitive procurement this month in the amount of $176,746. I move this item.
Second. All in favor? Anybody opposed? So moved.
Competitive procurements, yellow. The committee recommended approval of 7 competitive procurements this month for a total of $9,941,690, and I move them.
Second. All those in favor? Anybody opposed? So moved.
Ratifications, pink. There were none this month, and that concludes the Finance Committee report.
Thank you, Andrew. Susan, Transportation Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Transit Committee considered one action item. That action item was the appointment of Transit Adjudication Bureau senior hearing officers. The committee recommends the action, and I move it.
All those in favor? Any opposed? So moved.
With respect to procurements, there were 38 actions approved by the Transit Committee. There are 5 non-competitive procurements in the green pages totaling $78.7 million. These were approved by the committee, and I move them.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? So moved.
The competitive procurements included 38 items for a total of $6.11 billion. These included 18 individual 10-year contracts for accessoride paratransit services. These were approved by the Transit Committee, and I move them.
All in favor? Any opposed? Jeff?
I just want to point out that the paratransit contract is the single most scarce contract I think I've ever voted on. And that the only reason why I feel comfortable about it is that this contract sets rates for the next 10 years, is that we don't have to do any of it. And we have just heard that our paratransit contracts and costs are going to increase, in fact, double in the next 4 years. I don't think we're doing all that we can. I'm confident that President Roberts is looking at it. We should be doing more vouchers, more taxis, and other options working with labor. I'm confident that we're looking at that, but this contract, if we have to pay this amount, then we're not doing something right. So I'm moving it forward with the understanding that we're going to be looking at other options and that this does not guarantee us into anything.
Any other comments? Susan?
I'd like to point out that we are moving ahead with a few options to try to reduce our costs, one being an expanded voucher program, one being a pilot with our labor, and thirdly, Mr. Saul has suggested that we get the appropriate projections for the next 10 and 20 years, which I've asked Transit to provide, and that we look at those with respect to going to Albany, the federal government, or wherever else we could, in order to see that additional funding is provided not through the MTA.
Any other comments? There are nobody opposed, so it's moved. Next.
Ratifications are on the pink pages. There are 5 procurements in the ratification section totaling $2.6 million that were approved by the Transit Committee.
Mr. Chairman, I ask that we move these items.
I recuse from this one.
Okay, second, please. All in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? So moved.
Moving on to the MTA Bus Committee meeting. There was one action item, and board approval is sought to modify the MTA Bus Company's 2000 to 2004 capital plan. I move the action.
All in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? So moved.
Procurements, there are 9 actions for a total of $12.53 million. The non-competitive green page procurements total $830,000. The committee recommended these, and I move them.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? So moved.
There are 6 competitive procurements in the yellow pages totaling $10 million. The committee recommended these.
Mr. Chairman, I ask that we move these items.
I recuse F1.
Okay. Second? All in favor? Anybody opposed? So moved.
There is 1 ratification in the pink pages in the amount of $1.7 million. The committee recommended it, and I move it.
All in favor? Anybody opposed? So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Susan. Mitch, would you do Long Island Bus and Railroad?
Long Island Railroad, first of all, on behalf of Chairman Mack and the Long Island Committee, we want to once again, sorry about that. The committee wants to once again congratulate the Long Island Railroad personnel and the police officers on their tremendous action at the Freeport Station. Their courage and dedication to not only to their customers, but to the safety of everyone is a great example of what MTA people are. And Vince, I would appreciate if you could once again tell the labor people how appreciative we are. And I know I've told the chief, but it's a great example of MTA at its best. Thank you. Long Island Railroad had a 95.22% on-time performance in June, which allowed the railroad to set its best half-year service in 30 years. It's
So it's all right.
I take advantage of the microphone whenever I get an opportunity to do so, to extol the virtues of the Long Island Railroad.
And Jim says, bring it on, right?
And our passenger load is 7% above what it was in the past, and the president of the railroad and I have agreed that we're every year going to make sure we have a Triple Crown candidate at Belmont Park and Billy Joel concerts at Chase Stadium because they significantly increase our ridership. All we have to do is make sure that happens every year. Procurements. The non-competitive green pages, there are 4 procurements in the non-competitive section in the amount of $18.3 million. The committee approved these procurements, and I move them.
Second.
Opposed? So moved.
The competitive yellow pages, there are 4 competitive procurements in this month's agenda totaling $2.431 million. The committee has requested the board to include 2 conditions to number 4, the 4th item relating to engineering services for the third track project in Nassau County. The committee is requesting that the $100,000 in study money for the short-term benefits, all those benefits must complement rather than substitute for the third track project. And second, that no funds can be used from the construction budget for the project unless the short-term improvements can be incorporated into the third track construction project. With these 2 conditions added, the committee has approved all of these procurements, and I move them.
Second. All those in favor?
There are-
Any opposed? So moved.
There are no ratifications. For Long Island Bus, there are no action items. Non-competitive procurements, there's 1 non-competitive procurement in the amount of $100,000. The committee approved this, and I move it.
All in favor? Any opposed?
And there are
So moved.
2, in the yellow pages, 2 competitive procurements in the amount of $580,000. The committee approved these items, and I move them.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
And there are no ratifications.
Okay. Jim, you're up. What do you got for us?
Mr. Chairman, Metro North Railroad operates 96
Microphone, Jim.
Put the mic on and say it again.
96.4 on-time performance. 96.4. There were no action items this month. Metro North is requesting approval of 6 procurements this month, totaling $17,446,577. In the green are the non-competitive procurements. There are 3, totaling $5,517,700, including a 3-year purchase authorization with the original equipment manufacturer for our M4 car replacement parts. The committee has approved them, and I move them.
Second, please.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? So moved.
Competitive procurements in the yellow. There are two competitive procurements this month totaling $11,883,877, including construction supervision and inspection services for the Poughkeepsie Station Building Improvement Project, and also design and furnish the DC traction switchgear replacement for the substations on the Metro North Harlem line. The committee has approved them, and I move them.
Second, please.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? So moved.
There is one item for ratification totaling $45,000. Committee approved it, and I move it.
Second. All in favor? Any opposed? So moved.
It's the end of our report.
Thank you. Mitch, you're back up.
Bridges and Tunnels. The Bridges and Tunnels Committee met this month. There are no action items. There is one in the green sheets, non-competitive procurements. There's one non-competitive procurement in the amount of $400,000. The committee approved this item, and I move it.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? So moved.
There are 5 competitive procurements in the yellow sheets totaling $31 million. The committee approved these actions, and I move them.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? So moved.
And in the pink pages, there is one ratification in the amount of $374,000. The committee approved this item, and I move it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
And
So
one
moved.
other item, which the Bridge and Tunnel Committee is watching very closely. While many people may think that a reduction in bridge and tunnel usage is good, a reduction in bridge and tunnel usage also has the opportunity to reduce the amount of subsidy which the Bridges and Tunnels gives to mass transit. So while we're watching that number very closely, Acting President Moretti has provided us with a significant amount of information that we're looking at, but that is why we are all intertwined as people move from their automobiles to take mass transit. That has good points. One of the negative points is it reduces the amount of subsidy that we get from Bridges and Tunnels, and that's part of our budgetary analysis, which we'll be going through.
Thank you. Jim, you're back up.
Okay, MTA Capital Construction, we have 4 procurements this month for board approval. Non-competitive procurements in the green. There is one non-competitive for $304,000. The committee approved this, and I move it.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? So moved.
There were no competitive procurements this month. Ratifications, there are 3 ratifications this month totaling $4,996,000. The committee approved these, and I move them.
Second.
All in favor? Anybody opposed? So moved.
This month, the Capital Construction Planning and Real Estate Committee reviewed and recommended a total of 15 real estate items for board approval. The two actions seek approval of exchange of property interest involving the City of New York. 6 actions seek approval of license agreements, 1 approval of a determination and finding, 2 approval of lease agreements, 1 seeking a permit agreement, 3 easement interest, and a revised number 14 granting a permanent easement to the County of Westchester was also recommended by the committee and was provided to you earlier. The committee approved all these, and I move them.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to recuse myself from item number 13 under the MTA Metro North Railroad.
Okay, we got that? Okay,
Thank
all
you.
in favor? Anybody opposed? So moved.
End of report.
And a report. Susan, diversity, please.
The Diversity Committee met this month in order to review the data and methodology that we're required to use to set a goal for the utilization of disadvantaged business enterprises in our agency-wide federal contracts. The committee did that and approved the adoption of a 17% goal for the use of DBEs on our federal contracts, and I move it.
Second, please. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? So moved. Okay, at this time, I'd like to call for a motion to go into executive session for the board to conduct and discuss matters falling within the enumerated purposes of Section 105 of the Open Meetings Law, specifically a security, public safety matter, and a matter relating to collective bargaining. May I have a motion?
Motion made.
Second, all in favor? We're going in. Thank you, everybody. Have a nice day. Have a nice summer. We'll see you September.
Jeremy, you want to call it?
Lee, do you personally think that Albany and City Hall should step up to the plate and not only come up with the funding that you're asking for, but spare riders a back-to-back fare hike? Do you personally think that that's the right thing to do?
I think most importantly, that's what we have the Ravage Commission to do, to see what is fair, what is appropriate for all the different parties involved in the MTA. It's certainly something that we need to look closely at.
Lee, could you clarify, because there's some, when you talked, you said that we would get back on track with every other year there would be a fare hike, and there seems to be some discussion now with, wait a minute, this isn't 24 months, we're talking now like 17 or 18 months we'll have back-to-back, or almost back-to-back increases. When you go 8% this time around, and then if you look ahead to like 2011 rather than 2012, that's another 5%, so that's looking like 13%, am I correct, over about 17 or 18 months.
Well, again, let me first state that we don't want to be here right now. The plan, had been to do it, every 2 years, and the last thing we want to do is be in this position. It is 2 calendar years. I think you're right about the arithmetic that it comes out to probably 18 months, and that is a function basically of where we are now.
You expressed that you wanted the labor unions to give, I guess we call it modest contributions, and looks like Mr. Toussaint didn't appear necessarily too happy about that. And with the contract expiring, I believe, in January of 2009, how do you anticipate negotiations to go to? Do you foresee any trouble like there was last time? Do you think that, or do you think that you could overcome something, even considering the budget situation?
There's nothing new in what we said. This has been a point of discussion between Mr. Toussaint and myself, and our negotiators were involved in discussions, and I think both Mr. Toussaint and I are hopeful that we will come up with a successful resolution. But there's nothing new here. This was in the financial plan that I presented last year.
Do you have any reaction to the governor's comments yesterday?
My reaction was that I think he is right in terms of having the Ravitch panel look at how we should deal with our operating budget and capital budget. I think that was the fundamental point that the governor made. I gave the governor tremendous credit for creating the Ravitch Commission. It was his idea, and I think he's right in doing that.
Well, he also said he's going to do everything he can to try to stop a fare hike, and the MTA shouldn't get in this habit of constantly going to the riders. What do you have to say to that?
Yeah. Let me talk about the subject of what we have done, and that is that we have already cut from 2004 to 2007 5% of our controllable expenses. In addition to that, we are now committed to cut an additional 6% over the next 4 years, including this one, which is 11%. And then on top of that, we have added another $45 million, which gets you to 12%. We have moved on some of the most dramatic institutional changes that will cut costs as well as improve service. The creation of MTA Business Services, which will save $30 to $40 million a year. We've already consolidated the management of 3 bus companies. Also, we're moving on general managers in the subways, which we think will cut, or we believe that will help in terms of cutting costs in addition to improving services. So we have done a lot. We will continue to look at doing more, and that's how we react to it.
Lee, the financial plan that you unveiled today does call for 13% increases over 18 months. If you could talk directly to the ridership and the people who pay tolls, what would you say to them about the need to do something so dramatic?
I mean, what I would say is that the last thing that we want to do is be up here right now asking for this contribution. We were comfortable with the financial plan that we presented last year, which called for fare and toll increases every 24 months at the rate of inflation. It is unfortunate that the MTA was first put in this position largely by debt service, largely a debt service that was created from funding the 2000 capital plan that caused our debt service costs from caused them to go from the lower hundreds of millions of dollars up to $2 billion by 2012. That is the primary reason that you have this entire construct. That's a swing of over $1 billion. And you do the arithmetic in terms of the gaps, you will see that right there. It is also unfortunate that the real estate industry revenues have collapsed. They are what masked that debt service over the last period of years, and they're gone. Fuel also had a part to it. I would say that the MTA has done overall a good job of controlling its costs. We had very competitive labor contracts over the last several years, and we will continue to do our part. As I say, we are now upwards in the range of budget reductions of controllable expenses, in the range of 11-12%. And if you look back about what happened, before 2004, we suspect there were significant reductions below that. I think that they should be supportive of the Ravitch Commission that will look at what is the fair and appropriate contribution that our strap hangers should be making, that the agencies should be doing, and what our state and city partners should be doing. I appreciate that the state, is in a bad way financially. Same thing for the city. It's a very, very difficult, challenging time for all of us. The other thing I would state is that we are working as hard as we possibly can to improve service. Again, we have a system that is 100 to 150 years old. That is why we have been pushing the 2nd Avenue subway, dealing with the issue of overcrowding on the Lexington Avenue subway. That's why we've been pushing community-based train control as a central point during congestion pricing to put CBTC on the number 7 line and on the Queens Boulevard and Hillside Avenue line. And we have implemented a number of improvements. A number of them reported on this week, some before, whether it's the text messaging, whether it's the bus rapid transit, and we will continue to do that. We will work as hard as we can to improve service.
Mayor Bloomberg was emphatic yesterday that there's going to be no new money coming from the city. If he doesn't give that money for excessive rides and student busing, what's that going to mean? Is it possible that these fare increases are going to go higher? And if so, by how much?
Well, again, we by law are required to submit a balanced financial plan. That's required in terms of the rating agencies. It's required in terms of the state controller regulations. And so what we put forward, consistent with those regulations, are reasonable assumptions, proposals that could be acted upon in terms of the state and the city. What now occurs, again, is a Ravitch Commission that will have its recommendations about what should then transpire. And then we will see where we are after, where we are in December, if you will.
Correct me if I'm wrong, the Ravitch Commission's findings are supposed to be released in December, correct?
Correct.
And you said the final budget will be given to the board, late November or November. So how is that going to work? How are you going to implement the Ravitch Commission?
Sure. What will occur is that the board will have to we will have to present to the board, and the board will adopt. We will present to the board, and the board will adopt in December a budget that lays out how we will balance it, and it will have recommendations that will reflect, in large part, where the Ravitch Commission is doing. We will be working closely with the Ravitch Commission. So, in terms of the Ravitch Commission, which will be ending up the end of November, early December, they will reflect that. Obviously, we will then, go into the calendar year, beginning January 1, with these recommendations for the legislature to approve them over the next session. And that will be a very critical time for us.
Tim and then Bobby. Yeah, sir, the mayor's comments that may resonate more with riders were the ones where he said if a $10 billion agency can't find 5% per year, that's poor management. How do you react to that?
I react to it, in a couple of ways. First, again, to restate, when you look at how much has been cut, it's 5%. We're committed to another 6%. You're into the 11-12% range, which is north of what the mayor referred to in terms of the 5%. And again, the trick is to do it without impacting service.
But that's over several years, is it not, officer, he's talking about 5% per year.
Right, but I don't think, I'm not aware that the mayor was aware of the budget cutting that had transpired before. It's one thing if you have a blank canvas to then cut, 5, 10, 15%, and that's what, we are committed, as I said, to cutting an additional 6%. But you have to look at the cumulative impact on the agency. I would also say that we want to avoid the experience of Chicago, where in Chicago about 20 years ago, the agency cut back too far into the muscle and did service cuts, and the folks who now run the Chicago system are saying the Chicago system never recovered because they cut too deeply. Third, from a personal standpoint, I'm kind of proud that under Mayor Giuliani, I took the largest, what I'm told, was told at the time, the largest percentage of budget cuts of any agency when I was commissioner of city DOT. NYPD had been spared because of safe cities, safe streets, fire as well. And so the percentage cut that we were able to do while improving services was, I believe, in the range of about 15%. And so, I am, in my career, I've been on the cutting edge, pardon the pun, in terms of cutting budgets, and that's what we will do here. We will cut as much as we can without impacting service. And if you look at the initiatives we've already undertaken, we are in a good position to do that. To try and do it in 1 year, to try and cut an additional 5% in 1 year, I think would be extremely difficult without impacting service or having layoffs.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, you're a gubernatorial appointee. When you hear the governor say a fair increase should not happen, does there come a point in the fall when you take Mr. Sander aside and say, we like the job you're doing, but this increase simply is not going to happen, the board won't go?
I think we're far, far away from December, and a lot of water is going to pass under the dam between now and then, and people are going to say a lot of things between now and then, and the board in December has a responsibility under law to pass a balanced budget. We'll deal with the reality as it exists then, and what we know then may be a lot different than what we know now. So I don't think we're in the position to make a judgment or a statement about what the situation will be in December, but remember, by law, we have to pass a balanced budget, and that's our job, and we'll do our job.
Bobby and then Rich.
Lee, talking about the timeline, you guys get the recommendations from the Riders Commission in December, and then you obviously have to wait for the state legislature to act over the next few months. So when would Riders actually have an idea of how big a fare hike looks like in terms of the different
We will have to frame that in December. When the board adopts the budget, we will have to, lay out what will transpire if recommendations are not implemented.
And can you do, 8%?
And that would be, fair, in terms of fares and tolls or service reductions.
An 8% increase in fare box revenue. Can you do that without raising the base fare? I mean, do you know what that might look like? Or talking?
Too early to tell in terms of how we get there.
So can I just ask a clarification? So basically you would lay out two plans. One would be the plan if you don't get whatever the Ravage Commission recommendations are, and one would be if you do?
Mm-hmm. Roughly. I mean, we have to talk about how we format from a legal standpoint in terms of assumptions. We obviously will present a budget that will then be implemented, but what will occur, how we lay out, what will occur if the legislature doesn't adopt the recommendations, that will be in there.
I think there's a clear difference between this time and last time, and that last time we did in December, and we held the hearings, and we had an increase in March. This time we're moving it out, so there is time for the legislature to act. We're taking that into account. We have to allow the recommendations of the Ravage Commission to have a chance to work their way through the political process. We've done that in our planning. Hopefully that will all work out. Just remember that we are very much obligated to all our riders. We do not want to cut service. We know we have more riders every day than we did the day before. Cuts become very important not to hurt or make these people unsafe while we're having more riders. So we have to balance the two. It's easier to talk about than it is to keep your balance. And so we take each day at a time. We don't try to prejudge anything, and I don't want us to get into a position of making a statement where we've obligated ourselves when the situation is changing every moment.
One other point I just wanted to add in reference to the question that Tim had mentioned. Our ridership has gone up by 40%, and there are also additional personnel demands from that because of the additional cleaning that has to occur. So that also should be added into that context as well. It's not as if our workload has also remained stable. It has gone up significantly and continues to go up.
Just to put a human face on it, this is for both of you. Are you saddened or surprised or disappointed to be in the position of having to go to the riding public and paying the tolls for an increase at this time?
I think we can say we're very upset. I mean, who would want to, in our position, go and do this sort of thing? This is not something that people in public service want to do, would raise the fares to the riders or raise taxes to cover the increase in costs any other way. But fuel costs have gone up. We can't do anything about that. If they go down, well, we'll all be the beneficiary of that. I think the staff at the MTA is working very hard, along with all the union personnel, to do the best job they can to keep the costs down as much as anybody possibly can. But the world is what the world is. We can't change reality. We have to deal with reality as it is. And I think the MTA as a whole is doing a wonderful job in dealing with these problems as they come up. And hopefully by the fall, the situation will be better. And if it's not, it's not. If it is, well, it is. No one wants to increase the fares. No one wants to increase other taxes to cover any difference. It's nobody's desire to do that. Neither the unions, nor the staff, nor the boards. We would like to be here smiling at you saying we have a surplus and we can reduce it. I mean, why wouldn't we? I mean, we're human beings just like the rest of you, and I think you've got to take into account that an awful lot of people, almost 70,000 people, who are working very hard to keep this system working safely, efficiently, and affordably. And that's our goal, and that's what we're going to continue to do.
And the chairman spoke for me on that. I am as upset as he is.
This is a separate but I think related issue. In about 2 hours, the City Council is going to ask for a $1 surcharge on taxi rides to offset fuel costs, and yet you're requesting a fare hike to offset fuel costs, and many of them criticized you yesterday. Is there an hypocrisy or a bias against the MTA on the part of some of our elected officials?
We're not asking for anything. We have to, by law, propose a plan to cover a gap. What's going to happen between now and December, then we'll be asking for it. We haven't asked for anything. We have proposed something as we're required to do under law. How it works out between now and then is up to an awful lot of people and an awful lot of events that are going to be beyond everybody's control.
Obviously, the mayor doesn't want to give the MTA any more money. What is the best case that you can make for why the city should be obligated to help out with paratransit and student discounts and what you're asking for?
We were legally obligated to show specific actions, reasonable assumptions that our partners could take to meet that gap. In terms of what is the appropriate city contribution, state contribution, really leave it to the Rapch Commission, which the mayor acknowledged in his remarks yesterday. Again, we had no choice but to ask our partners in terms of what we presented for this financial plan. We did not want to increase the rate of fares and tolls beyond the rate of inflation, and beyond that we had to go to our other funding partners to provide assistance on that.
I just wondered if you could give us some more details about two of the things you spoke of earlier, ads in the tunnels and some kind of a hookup with CNN, and what will that entail?
The ads and tunnels are things that we have seen elsewhere in other countries and other properties, and we'll get back to you with more information about that, but it is representative of our interest in, within reason, without losing the dignity of public space, increase revenue. Similarly, we have the pilot with CNN, which will allow us to put television consoles, monitors, if you will, where we will be able to use them for our purposes in terms of getting the message out, but have the potential of giving us revenue, similar to what you see in the airports.
Is that something just for subways or for
We're looking at it, my understanding. Linda, you want to speak more to that? Linda Kleinbaum?
The idea is that we...
Linda, over here.
Well, to let you alone. Let's go in front of the mic.
The idea of the pilot is at the CNN's cost, we would put in probably at about 6 stations. We're going to try and do it across our modes. It's not clear yet exactly what the stations will be. We're working with them. And at the end of the pilot, based on the results, we would hope we'd be able to move it system-wide and create, as Lee had said, a revenue stream moving forward in the out years of the program.
How much could you make?
I'm not going to speculate on that at this point.
So you said in different modes, do you mean on the commuter rails?
Yes. Commuter rail subways, I also meant potentially bus.
And buses,
yes.
buses as well.
And what would you be able to use it for yourselves? I mean, would these be like transit updates, transit minutes, transit
Correct.
tips?
Correct. It would be a transit news service, much as Lee said, much like in the airports, but we would also have the ability in an emergency to override and put emergency information out, and every so often we would have time on the screens to put out system information.
When does
So,
it start?
so for example, if you had some kind of a tie-up, you'd be able to notify people to take other.
Correct. That's
So
the idea.
When does the pilot start?
Well, we'll be taking probably the next 12 to 18 months to install in the pilot stations and to determine the results. And at the end of that, we determine how to move forward on a more system-wide basis.
Was this something that you guys initiated or that CNN has approached you about?
Actually, I can't answer that. I'm not sure whether it was a combination of us working to find sponsors who wanted to work with us in new and creative ways, or they came to us. It was. We can get back to you on that. I'm not sure, actually.
I'm sorry, is CNN paid, in terms of the pilot finances, is CNN paid, does MTA have to put in money?
In terms of the pilot, the cost of the installation is fully on CNN. There are no revenues associated, however, above that for the pilot. Moving forward, if we determine it's in both of our interests to do so, there would be a revenue stream as well.
Lee, given the fact that it's been more than a decade since the city increased its contributions for student travel on the subways and buses, and the city and state are only covering half, do you envision ever taking a stronger, aggressive position in that you don't give them student Metro cards at half price, essentially, and they just have to go out and buy Metro cards for their kids?
I think that Mayor Bloomberg in general has been very supportive of the MTA on congestion pricing. He led that, talking about the importance of the MTA capital program in his remarks yesterday, talked about wanting to see the recommendations of the Ravitch Commission. And so, based on my personal conversations with the mayor and in general his public statements as well, I am hopeful that we can engage in a collaborative process that will address the funding needs of the MTA. You know, we had to indicate areas that we could pass the test of a reasonable assumption by the state controller's law, and we felt that this was an appropriate area to put up, again, for discussion, which is what this is all about, as potential funding from the city. We are cognizant of what the mayor says, that the city doesn't have any money. We are cognizant of what the governor has said, and I think that is why the Ravitch Commission is so important and why we need to work with that commission, which I am on, to ultimately make recommendations that protect the MTA, preserve the MTA, and are reasonable to all the different parties concerned, including the city. Yeah, exactly. You know, I never rule out anything.